But let's get to the football first and the offensive awards. They are our big story today. Ohio State's C.J. Stroud named the Graham George Offensive Player of the Year, the Thompson Randall L. Freshman of the Year, and the Greasy Breeze Quarterback of the Year. Stroud leading the Big Ten in passing yards and passing touchdowns, third in the nation in passing efficiency, 38 TD passes, just 5 picks. The fourth straight year a Buckeye QB has been named the conference's Offensive Player of the Year. The first team offense, the media and coaches agreeing on Stroud, Hassan Haskins, Kenneth Walker III, and David Bell at the skill positions. The coaches going with Chris Olave at the other receiver spot, the media with Jahan Dotson, Tyler Linderbaum, Thayer Munford, and Nicholas Petit-Frere. First teamers by both the coaches and media on the line. Josh Seltzner, Daniel Faalele, Andrew Stuber, I should say, and Peter Skoronski, all first teamers as well. Tight end split between Nebraska's Austin Allen and Wisconsin's Jake Ferguson. Let's get to our big interview, and it is the man who captured 3 individual awards. Ohio State quarterback C.J. Stroud, the Quarterback of the Year, the Freshman of the Year, the Offensive Player of the Year. C.J., which of those 3 means the most to you?
Honestly, I'm just blessed to even be in the predicament I am. Definitely blessed to be around this great university with this great team. So, I mean, without my teammates and my team, my coaches, I wouldn't be able to do it. So I'm really blessed for all of them.
Well, last year was a redshirt year for you. So you're a freshman of the year, but of course you did redshirt last season. How important do you believe that redshirt was in terms of your development and being ready to go this year?
Yeah, it was amazing to get some, practices under my belt, especially against a national championship defense. I was on the scout team working against them every day, so it was definitely hard not even to be able to play, but it was still great to learn behind Justin. He taught me a lot of things. He taught me, what it took to be an elite college football quarterback. So, I mean, I just grasped all that in and try to use it this year.
You mentioned Justin Fields, who, of course, was so great for 2 years, finishing in the top 10 in the nation in passing efficiency both of those years. This is actually the 6th straight year that the Ohio State quarterback has been named the Quarterback of the Year in the Big Ten. How important was the quarterback tradition and lineage at Ohio State to you in recruiting in terms of making your decision?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the most important things that I really analyzed coming in was that if you come here, you got to play well. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So just coming behind other great quarterbacks, I try to do my best to hold up my part and try to lead our team to victory. And just seeing the guys do it ahead of me just kind of gives you confidence, but it is a sense of pressure there. So you just have to make sure you work hard and do everything possible to win.
Ryan Day not responsible for all of those, of course, because some of it was before he arrived, but certainly he has an incredible offensive system going here. What makes his offensive system so good for quarterbacks and something that works so effectively year in and year out?
Yeah, he does a good job of just tailoring the offense to what you like, and he asks you what you like going into the games and things like that. So, I mean, it's really just really not a too easy offense to learn, but once you get the grasp of it and the grasp, that you can really just take off with it and have fun.
I know this season did not end exactly as you wanted it to, although you still have at least one game left. But what was the most memorable moment for you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we didn't end the way that we wanted, but I'm still blessed to be a part of this team. And I don't know really my most memorable moment. I probably would just say the whole season. It's just been ups and downs, crawling and scratching just to get a win. I mean, this year wasn't the most prettiest year, but I think we took a great step as a team, especially being young. I think we'll be even better next year. So,
you talked about ups and downs. What was the biggest up? What was the moment that, as you think back to, well, what was my redshirt freshman year like that'll pop into your head?
Probably that first half of the Michigan State game. I had a lot of fun. We were kind of just rolling, and I felt like we were kind of unstoppable in that game. So that was probably one of the biggest highs that we had.
What did you learn this past Saturday that you feel like can help you going forward next year?
Honestly, it's a lot of things. Playing on the road every week, especially in the Big Ten, playing in those type of atmospheres is hard in a sense. So, I just think there's a lot of things that you can do better. I can learn a whole lot more from just that one game. I can't really put my finger on just one thing, but there's a lot of things I can learn from.
There is still one game to play, barring just complete chaos in front of you guys. That would possibly be in Southern California in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. What would that mean for you as someone who grew up not far from there to head essentially home and play a game at the Rose Bowl?
Yeah, of course, it's not the game that we want to be in or the games that we want to play for, but it's definitely an honor even to be considered to play back home. Like, that's been a dream of mine since I've been a little kid, so playing in the Rose Bowl. And I feel like if we can do that, I can just go out there and just have fun, be home, have a home atmosphere, and I think that'll be awesome.
We were talking before we started the interview, and you were telling me that you watched the first half of the basketball game last night and then went to sleep. What was your reaction when you woke up this morning and saw the Buckeyes knocked off number one?
Yeah, it was awesome for him. I'm super happy for him to get a win from a big-time program like that, and I think that's awesome. I know it's our Buckeye Nation goes crazy, basketball, football, baseball, anything. So I know it was loud. I know it was rocking. Those are hard atmospheres to play in. So I know it was probably a great little scenery.
It was. It was something else. CJ Stroud, congratulations again on a really good year. Look forward to seeing what the future holds for you. And thanks for spending a few minutes to talk to us here.
Thank you, guys. Y'all have a good one.
Transitioning to the CFP rankings out last night, as expected, Michigan moves up to number 2 after taking out the Buckeyes. Highest CFP ranking ever for the Wolverines. Alabama, Cincinnati holding steady at 3 and 4. Oklahoma State now up a couple spots to 5. The Cowboys and Notre Dame, the two teams that still have legitimate shots, it would seem, at jumping into the top 4, barring just massive chaos this weekend. You do see Ohio State still looming there at 7, so who knows? The rest of the Big Ten, Michigan State 11, Iowa 13. Anthony rejoining me. So what stands out from a Big Ten point of view first?
Well, that as of right now, with Michigan being at number 2, and I think that overall it's one of those seasons where the conference, if for some reason Michigan were to get upset by Iowa this weekend, doesn't look like the Big Ten's going to make the college football playoff in a season that, from a historic perspective, this has been a marvelous regular season for the Big Ten. And as it sits right now, like the SEC still has 2 teams in the mix. Big Ten's just got the 1 squad in the mix, but the Big Ten has definitively been the best conference during the regular season. You certainly wouldn't like it to work out where it just comes down to sort of this men's college basketball scenario from last year, where suddenly this marvelous regular season is marred by not necessarily being a deep part of the tournament. And that's the position the conference could end up in.
Yeah, it would be fascinating to see what would happen were Iowa to win. The committee really likes Michigan, right?
Yeah.
They have made it clear they think they are very good and a complete team. And number 2,
as Gary Barter reminded folks last night.
Yes.
Again.
It would depend. Look, none of this happens in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And so I think the bottom line is it would depend on so much other stuff. And that's why I hesitate to ask you the next question. But I do think Cincinnati, outside of obviously our interest in the Big Ten, to me, Cincinnati is the most interesting team because they have a chance to break through and become that first team from the group of 5 to get in. So let's just say form holds. Let's say that Georgia beats Alabama so that you only have 1 SEC team in there. Let's say Cincinnati wins. Let's say Oklahoma State wins. In your mind, were that to happen, so if you don't have really anything that borders on chaos, do you think Cincinnati gets in?
It would seem that way. I believe that's most likely, because then Alabama's out of the way in that mix. And so Oklahoma State could just easily ascend into that top 4 without Alabama being in anyone's way anymore at that point. Is there still the possibility that, a 2-loss Alabama were to get in? I suppose, but they just haven't been that impressive. I was debating that with folks both on the radio and on social media at different points in recent days here, where I think Alabama, from a macro perspective, is still viewed in the historic perspective of what Nick Saban's teams have been. But this year's Alabama squad is not one of Nick Saban's great teams.
No doubt.
They're in a down year in the SEC, and they're surviving. They have survived that conference. But Auburn isn't that good. And Auburn should have beat them with better clock management. They
were one play away on like 4 different occasions.
And that they're not the only one who've been in a similar scenario with the Tide. So, I mean, to try and make a case for a 2-loss Alabama if they're to lose, yes, they would lose to Georgia, to the best team in America, but I don't see that happening.
Okay, well, I guess what I'm asking is, let's say Cincinnati wins really unimpressively. Could Notre Dame jump them?
Well, I thought the really big takeaway from what Gary Barter was addressing last night was that the committee would factor it in that Brian Kelly is no longer with the Irish, which I wasn't completely aware of that caveat being within their considerations, that if you have a team, and this is after all the conference championship games are done, the consideration, just like the conference championship, at the end of the year would enhance someone's resume because they're a conference champ and you're comparing like with like. Then that's a consideration. And apparently, the coach not being there, just like a great player not being there, would be a part of their considerations as well. So it does seem to make that road for Notre Dame even longer than it would have been beforehand. I mean, they haven't even named an interim coach yet as we sit here and speak about it.
It doesn't seem like they're going to.
Right.
There's a possibility they're just going to forge on with some sort of committee of coaches. But, yeah, that to me, I all along I felt like there's no way that you can put Notre Dame in front of Cincinnati. I don't think you should hold Brian Kelly being gone against the players. I mean, far from it. I guess I just don't see a convincing way. I could see, I could see if Cincinnati wins unimpressivly and Oklahoma State wins really, really impressively.
Right.
I could see an argument to have Oklahoma State jump them. I don't. How do you know what Ohio State or what Notre Dame would be like without Brian Kelly? Who knows? I mean, I just don't think you can say, like, let's say it's Marcus Freeman, right? Like, he may be the coach anyway. So you're saying we know as a group that they're going to be significantly worse with Marcus Freeman? I mean, how do you know that?
Well, you don't know that, but just like if one of their better players, like if Jack Cohn were out for the season, but they have been rotating quarterbacks, but Jack Cohn weren't available for the postseason, then they would hold that against Notre Dame. So I do see where it's a similar case to be made, where their head coach and who manages their offense, and obviously the winningest coach in Notre Dame history, that is a loss. That is worthy of being factored in. It surprises me that they would, to that extent, for a team that's put the totality of work together that Notre Dame has put in. But, by comparison, whether it's the head coach or whether it's a player, like, I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you go with it. Like, if the running backs coach isn't there and their starting running back doesn't play, then does that matter? But the head
judge
coach
them on who they are. Judge them on who they are.
Well, who they've been, though.
What if Marcus Freeman turns out to be the next Newt Rockne, right? And then 20 years from now, we say, do you remember when they bumped him out of the playoff because they didn't think he was good enough?
But the committe's not predictive, though. Don't
try to predict it. Don't try to predict how, like, a coach is different than a player. I don't know. I mean, we saw Ohio State do pretty well in the playoff with a third-string
quarterback.
Right?
They made it happen.
Yeah, just don't sit here and tell me you know how it's going to play out. Back on Big Ten today, Iowa center Tyler Linderbaum, the Remington Pace Offensive Lineman of the Year. Linderbaum, widely considered the top NFL draft prospect at his position. It's the second time in 3 years a Hawkeyes won this award. Tristan Wirfs took it a couple years ago. He is the 6th Hawkeye to be named the conference's top O-lineman in Kirk Ferentz' 23 years in Iowa City. Taking a look at the second-team All-Big Ten offense, former walk-on Aiden O'Connell, the second-team QB, currently third in the nation in completion percentage. 2 freshmen, Travion Henderson, Braylon Allen, the second-team running backs. Garrett Wilson, named to both second teams as a receiver. The second-team offensive linemen include 3 Michigan players, Andrew Vastardis, Zach Zinter, and Ryan Hayes. So 4 of the Wolverines' 5 O-linemen, either first or second team. Speaking of the Wolverines, we switch gears to that little title game coming your way on Saturday. Neither team has won a Big Ten title, of course, since they split it in 2004. First ever trip to the title game for the Wolverines makes them the 8th Big Ten team to play in Indy. Iowa is there for the second time and first in 6 years. Michigan is the clear favorite, Anthony. So what's the formula here in your mind for Iowa?
Like that they have to do everything in their power to neutralize the defensive ends for Michigan. That's where things start and stop, because Iowa's offense has been so ordinary at best throughout much of the season that I think that if you allow those pass rushers to affect the pocket on a consistent basis, then it's a recipe for disaster. And frankly, that's been one of the issues that Iowa's had in certain games this year, where I think that Brian Ferentz and Kirk Ferentz have been so accustomed to the offensive tackle position, being able to hold down the fort one-on-one, they've too frequently left those tackles one-on-one, and good pass rushers have been able to get home on either quarterback. And I think that the game plan this week, and Iowa's running backs are quality in pass protection. So I do think that we're going to have to see Iowa do everything they can to chip the edge, to use screen passes in the quick game, and then just find those moments for some shot plays, for some drop back. But when it happens, you have to make sure it's off play action and that those tackles aren't one-on-one. It's got to be a big day of pass protection for the tight ends, for the running backs. The solar plexus of Aiden Hutchinson has to be sore by the end of the game. That's what the focal point needs to be for the running back. Go up there as these pass rushers just come out of nowhere and knock the mess out of them, because then you can at least stymie the pass rush long enough to give your quarterback time to throw it.
And again, this has been an issue for Iowa this year, and this is why this team in some ways is very uncharacteristic of Kirk Ferentz. I mean, they've given up the most tackles for loss in the Big Ten. They've given up the second most sacks in the Big Ten. This is not the group you want to be staring down when you've had problems on the offensive line. I mean, look, Linderbaum's been great. We just showed you he's the offensive lineman of the year. He's a clear-cut pro. He's probably going to start in the NFL at center for a decade. But the rest of it is a little bit shaky. No question about it.
Yeah, they've been dicey. And, more of it has been on the edge as they've gotten healthier on the interior, but there's certainly been some breakdowns inside as well. I think for Iowa's offense to find those moments where, we know they're not going to give up on the run game, even in moments where the run game isn't necessarily picking up chunk runs. And it's been nice, I think, down the stretch, the past month of the season. There's been more success in the run game, certainly than there was earlier in the year. More success than there hasn't been, I think, even from one series to the next, just as Iowa's offense has kind of gotten through the stretch run here. And we'll see, assuming Spencer Petras will end up being the starter at quarterback, him protecting the football, regardless of the pass rush. You can't fumble it to Michigan. You can't throw it to that Wolverine secondary. You have to make sure that the worst thing that happens at the end of a drive for Iowa is to put their outstanding punter on the field to shift field position.
All right, so Kirk Ferentz saying this week that he does expect to go with Spencer Petras, quarterback, that Petras is going to be the starter. What do you make of that decision? I mean, it seems to me that all other things kind of being equal, and they're not the same quarterback. I mean, there are clearly differences between the two of them, as there are for any quarterbacks. But I mean, their styles of play are not dramatically different from one another. It feels to me like in a situation like this, you kind of go with the experience and the guy maybe who knows the offense a little better and has seen more situations. It just made sense to me that as good as Padilla was coming in relief against Northwestern, maybe that was more about Northwestern, and it just feels like Petras is probably the way to go.
Yeah, and in more just extended action, the opponent gets some film on you. They see what your strengths and weaknesses are, and perhaps you as the quarterback are sort of preparing for the game through that microscopic lens, and maybe things tighten up a little bit in a different way than when you're just called to come off the bench. I've been in those situations as a coach sometimes where the backup comes in and lights it up. It's like, oh, you're the starter now. And the next week just doesn't go quite as you expect, quite as you hope. So, I mean, I think Spencer Petras makes sense. It is the biggest stage in the Big Ten as far as the moment after the regular season would be. And, obviously the college football playoff would go beyond that. But I think as far as the quarterbacks for Iowa, it makes sense to go with the more experienced guy. Spencer Petras has made a lot of plays. He at times shows himself to be a talented passer. It's just been so wildly inconsistent throughout his career. That's where the frustration comes in at. But Padilla had his opportunity to go out and snatch the starting job with multiple starts. He didn't do it. His performance didn't live up to that. So if they go back to Spencer Petras, which it seems they will, I think it makes all the sense in the world. And then you still got Padilla to potentially come off the bench and ride things off into the sunset if it came down to it.
What are the other biggest things you're watching in this game?
Well, I think on the opposing side of the ball for the Hawkeye defense against that Michigan offense, Michigan's been so effective at protecting the football this season. And that's probably the biggest strength-on-strength matchup when it comes down to it. Not only just the Michigan ground attack against one of the best rush defenses in the country, but Michigan protecting the football. Because when it comes down to it, the Iowa Hawkeyes are going to have to find a way to manufacture some additional offense via field position. That's where points have come on the board for Iowa this season. I don't necessarily think Michigan should take a conservative approach, though. It still behooves the Wolverines, in my opinion, to be called into aggression. You know, and I know, you talked to Coach DiNardo about it more than I do, just the concern for sort of the intangible. Michigan is riding high. You got to talk to Aiden Hutchinson about just that notion of whether or not they can get up again for this opportunity like they were against Ohio State. I think it behooves Jim Harbaugh and his staff to call them into some aggression. When they're on offense, go with a trick play at some point. Go with, maybe a double reverse pass. Go with something. Go with some shot plays, not on a consistent basis, but look for those moments to go out and attack the jugular of the Hawkeyes early. Just don't make a habit out of it, because we know Iowa can intercept the football at a higher rate than anyone in football.
Yeah, 22 interceptions this year, leading the nation. Again, they are plus 13 turnover margin, but Michigan's only turned it over 9 times all year. I mean, they do such a great job protecting the football. They are incredibly well-rounded team. Lots more where this came from. Saturday, Big Ten tailgate heading to Indy. 2 full hours of coverage. Get you fired up for that championship game showdown between the Wolverines and the Hawkeyes. It's Big Ten tailgate presented by TIAA. Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern here on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Let's turn our attention to hoops, and a really good night for the Big Ten in the Challenge. 4 wins, headlined by Ohio State knocking off number 1 Duke, number 2 Purdue just obliterating Florida State. Minnesota stayed perfect, a tip-in the closing seconds. Rutgers back on track. The only 2 losses came in overtime, Indiana and Northwestern. As promised, Andy Katz is here, and let's start with the Buckeyes. I mean, down 15 in the second half. The defensive effort down the stretch was just fabulous. What stood out to you about the win over Duke?
Well, it was phenomenal. I mean, first of all, they got Paolo Banchero and Mark Williams in foul trouble. Both those guys had 4. And what we talked about yesterday on this show, Dave, was the importance of not just E.J. Liddell, who was sensational because he had the free throws and the big bucket in the last couple possessions, but Zed Key and Kyle Young, that they had the front court for the most part to match Ohio State. But defensively, they did their job. And I'll tell you, Cedric Russell, because we said there has to be another perimeter player with Richie Johnson. Yes.
Guard play just wasn't there.
Because Wendell Moore was going to be so effective for Duke, Jeremy Roach for Duke, and yet Cedric Russell late in the game, and I talked after the game to E.J. Liddell, and he said, look, he was ready. He stayed ready, and he hit that big shot in the corner of the 3, free throws. To be able to call on someone like Cedric Russell late, that is huge for this Ohio State team because, like a lot of these teams, they're not healthy yet. And they got to wait and hopefully at some point get Justice Suing and Seth Towns back to add that depth. But they don't have the depth in the perimeter, so they need someone like Cedric Russell.
I know Eugene Brown either.
Yes.
But, yeah, I mean, Cedric Russell, what an amazing story, right? The guy scored 3 points all year. And then against number 1, and a huge situation comes through, really a shot in the arm for a team that had been a little uneven, but no doubt the potential is there. And again, to win a game on that stage, to come through, to lock down against a team of that caliber, the momentum that gives you going forward is just staggering.
No question. But I think also we have to put in perspective what Ohio State has been through, where they started the season with essentially a buzzer beater, Zed Key with the tip-in, and then in their big games, they draw Xavier on the road at Cintas in the Gavitt games, which was not an easy assignment. Xavier had been waiting for a game like that. And then down in Florida, back-to-back buzzer beaters, where they beat Seton Hall and lose to Florida on a buzzer beater. So they were ready for a late-game situation like this against Duke. And, I think Ohio State a little bit maligned as a crowd for basketball, but they brought it last night. No question about it. They were great for number 1 Duke.
And Chris Holtman appealing after the game, like, hey, we need you all year. We need everyone to be like this. It's hard. I mean, it's not always going to be the same atmosphere as when you're playing number 1. But first time in a decade that Duke had led by 10 or more at halftime and lost the game. So it really speaks to what a great job the Buckeyes did. So now it seems likely that Purdue ascends to number 1 in the country.
Got to get by Iowa first.
Yeah, that's true. And that'll be a tough game. Look, Iowa's playing really, really well. That game Friday night, by the way, here on the Big Ten Network.
I will be there.
Yes. But, man, they were good. And I know Florida State was shorthanded and all that. It's not a great Florida State team to begin with. But holy cow, they can beat you in so many different ways. They are so impressive.
I think 93 is the number. The fact that they put 93 up against a Leonard Hamilton Florida State defensive team, shorthanded or not, those teams are known for their defense. And put 93 points on Florida State. That is a significant number. the fact that their rotation guys like Caleb First, the freshman, who looks like he's going to be like the ultimate Purdue guy, from the Kramer-esque, grouping, and Brandon Newman off the bench. They're getting such great play from the non-stars that this Purdue team, let's assume they get by Iowa, never assume, but and then number one, and they could hold this number one for a while.
They are really good, and they shoot the ball so well, right? I mean, they have perimeter, the inside, obviously, you have a two-headed monster. There just doesn't seem to be any discernible weakness on this team. There is none that I've found. They obviously defend the heck out of you. They are really, really good. Let's move on to some other games. Rutgers really needed a win last night. They had lost 3 buzzer beaters, basically, and lost games in the closing seconds. Again, not a great Clemson team, but what I thought was really telling is that Clemson put some game pressure on them in the second half, and I thought Rutgers responded really, really well. And again, they needed a win like this.
Well, it helped. It was at home. There's no question about it. But the fact that they won this game without Geo Baker, who is out now with a hamstring injury, and I was just texting with the staff, and they don't have a timetable on his return. And so that's significant. To win a game like this without Geo Baker, Michaela McConnell, he stepped up. He had 16, and we talked about this yesterday. They need another player to step up. But that was in addition to Geo, now without Geo, and especially with what they have coming up. Their next 2 Big Ten games and their next 2 games are at Illinois and home Purdue.
Yeah, needed a win.
I mean, we can't expect them to win those 2 games. So this was monumental for them to get this one, and then let's see what happens after those 2, if they lose them both, and then maybe they get Geo back, and then they can sort of right the ship.
No doubt, and sometimes it just comes down to making shots. I said yesterday they're shooting 24% from 3. They shot well into the 30s in this game, and that was good enough. Again, McConnell, Andre Hyatt, the transfer, played well, so got a few guys to contribute. Minnesota, still unbeaten. How about Luke Lowy? Flying in and tipping in a miss there. Again, Pitt is not very good. But Minnesota, I mean, this is a team where if you would have said they win 7 games for the whole year, I'm not sure that many people would have batted an eye, right? I mean, and here they are. They're still undefeated. They're really they're beating the teams they should beat, and they play really well defensively together, and they've got enough guys who can beat you to get it done on the offensive end.
Yeah, I think this is one of the best stories in the first month of the season for the Big Ten and men's basketball because this was so unexpected. They played in a tournament earlier in the season, a couple weeks ago, where they won and beat Princeton in overtime. And look, anytime you can win away from home, that is significant. And then to get this one, whether Pitt struggled or not, you are going on the road and getting a win. And Jameson Battle, he's averaging 17 a game. Was that expected? No. And so they're getting great production from places that they did not anticipate. And Ben Johnson's got them all in right now.
Yep.
They're buying in. And so regardless of what happens in the Big Ten, as long as it's not a complete collapse, I think they've got great momentum for the program going forward.
It's hard to do when you cobble a team together like that to get guys to kind of all buy in. It had been nearly 650 days since they'd won a road game. So it is a significant win.
Well, and Gabe Kauscher right now, who left Minnesota, he's having a great year at Iowa State.
Right.
So you're seeing one of your players do well somewhere else, and yet you're still doing okay.
Okay, let's talk about the 2 teams that lost. Start with Indiana. Man, that was an unbelievable game. They showed incredible resilience, I thought, to come back. I mean, Syracuse was just bombing behind the arc. You have the Boeheim brothers shooting the lights out early on. Indiana built this huge deficit. There are some things to be concerned about. The turnover number was astronomical. Trace Jackson-Davis was really good, although he was guilty on a lot of those turnovers. Miller Kopp really stepped up, really for the first time as a Hoosier. He showed what he is capable of. I still think you take a lot more positive out of that. The style of play was fun. That was a thrilling game.
Yeah, look, there's no question. They had multiple chances to win this game on the road and stay undefeated. Yes, they did give up 112 points, but it went to double overtime.
Yeah, exactly.
The most important news is that Trace Jackson-Davis was okay, because that was a legitimate scare when he knocked knees with Cole Swider, and he couldn't put any weight on it.
Yep.
And it might have just been sort of, he just stunned it because, anytime any of us do that, it hurts. And so that was okay that finally he came back and played great when he returned. But to your point, Miller Kopp scoring 28 was significant because that's what they brought him in for, to complement TJD. Right. But in this game, I mean, Parker Stewart and Xavier Johnson, they fouled out. They lost their backcourt. And so when that happens, the game changed. and they still had chances to win. So I think you take away positives out of this.
Absolutely. How about the sequence descended into overtime? The missed free throw, Jackson Davis 3. It's like you follow up 3, like, oh, yeah, that's what you should do, right? And then it's one of those rare times that it backfires on you. Northwestern, to some extent, kind of feels like the same old story, right? I realize they're still without Chase Audige, who was their leading scorer last year, but man, they had every opportunity in the world to win that game. They went like 11 of 24 on layups. What do you take away from that game?
Yeah, I mean, it's disappointing because they had chances, multiple chances with 2-pointers. I mean, late in the game, Boo Boo, he had one right in there. He just had a bad angle. I think they should have won that game. And I think they're going to kick themselves that they didn't win that game on the road. So now the pressure's on because let's see if Audige plays against Maryland. But that is a winnable Big Ten road game. Last year, they won a game at Indiana. They can beat Maryland. It is doable. Let's see if they can, if they get Audige back. Because look, Casey Simmons and Julian Roper, those are freshmen. Simmons, goose egg, Roper 5 points. If that's Audige instead of those two in terms of, I mean, they're just going to get more production out of them.
Yep.
Now, the ball can't stick with Chase when he comes back because, they got good ball movement without him. But I think that takes pressure off of Boo Buie, especially once he comes back. But the positive for them is we are really seeing the full Pete Nance. I thought late in that game, the way he was rebounding the basketball and starting those breaks and being a rim protector for Northwestern, that is significant going forward, and I think that's a positive to build on.
I do not understand why they don't play him more with Ryan Young. Ryan Young did not play in the overtime, and I think he's one of the most effective big men in the Big Ten. I just don't get it. He's +8 in the game, plus minus. I
don't have that answer for you.
I don't get it. I don't get it. We'll get you set for tonight. Next, chance to see Michigan, Michigan State, Wisconsin in action. Big Ten trying to wrap this thing up for the 3rd straight year. Tonight, do not miss a doubleheader of action in the Big Ten ACC Women's Basketball Challenge. Purdue hosting Georgia Tech, Minnesota against North Carolina. Coverage at 7 Eastern, presented by Disney Parks on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. On the men's side tonight, we've got Michigan State taking on Louisville. Wisconsin back in the top 25. They will play at Georgia Tech. Michigan visiting North Carolina. 6 games in all. Again, the Big Ten needs to win 2 to capture the challenge. Andy, let's start with Michigan State. They struggled with Kansas and Baylor. They have a couple good wins, though. So what do you make of this matchup with Louisville, with this interesting sidebar of Chris Mack making his return tonight as well?
Yeah, Chris Mack had the Louisville-imposed 6-game suspension for allegations of violations. And so he's back. Team went 5-1 in his absence, including knocking off Big Ten's Maryland down in the Bahamas. So Louisville's got some good momentum. But Michigan State is back in the Breslin Center for a big game with the crowd. So I fully expect the Spartans to rise up to the challenge. They've had time to recover from their trip to the Bahamas after getting sort of handled by Baylor. And this is always a concern for Tom. I've talked to him many times about this, where they come off those holiday tournaments and it's right into the ACC Big Ten Challenge, sometimes on the road, and sometimes there's not enough days in between. Yeah. But I think it really helped this year that they played Wednesday after completing that, the previous week. So I think that's a big plus for for Michigan State. And I just think the fact that Marcus Bingham Jr. is playing well for him, because remember, his camp, they thought, one and done, but he was nowhere near ready for that. And he's evolved into a legitimate scoring threat inside. Yeah, I like the Spartans.
It's funny because Thomas said the same thing to me through the years. In this early Big Ten game where you play 1 or 2 Big Ten games, right, in December, which I think has been a huge boon for the league. It's been fabulous. But when you do go to these preseason tournaments and you've got a Gavitt Games, you got an ACC Big Ten Challenge, it is hard. And Tom, certainly through the years, obviously, schedules incredibly difficultly. Where are you with Michigan? So they're going to Carolina. Hubert Davis, a buddy of both of ours, first-year coach at North Carolina. Interesting to see kind of the adjustments there. They have been up and down. Michigan's been up and down. What do you make of this game?
Well, I'd love to see what's going to happen inside with Dickinson and Diabate. I mean, because I think against Armando Bacot, that 1-2 punch can neutralize him. The big question is, will we see the Michigan guards rise up? Devontae Jones and Caleb Houston on the wing and Eli Brooks because they have an advantage there on the perimeter against Caleb Love and North Carolina. The other big question are the transfers for Carolina. Brady Manick from Oklahoma and Dawson Garcia. They come in with a lot of hype. They have not reached that hype yet as transfers, but they have the potential to do so. So if they do that, it's a toss-up. But this could be a great momentum boost for Michigan, because so far Michigan doesn't have that signature early win that they normally have had in the last couple of years under both Beeline and Juwan Howard. You know, they need to sort of do something different after what happened against Arizona defensively. They got absolutely run out of that gym in Las Vegas.
Yeah, interior defense was really a problem. It doesn't feel like that's as much Carolina's game. I mean, we shall see, but more of a perimeter-oriented team, at least to this point in the year, and they're going to want to push tempo, and that should be a fun game. Wisconsin, really a good story. I mean, you and I were talking early in the year, and we're kind of concerned about where the Badgers were, and then Johnny Davis comes back, and man, he just gives them a totally different dimension. They won Maui in Vegas, whatever we want to call the tournament that they won. I guess it is technically the Maui Invitational. But this team, and we talked about it a little bit yesterday, to me, they just seem a little bit more cohesive. You've got a star, but you got a lot of other guys who understand their role. I think Brad Davison has been a really good steadying force for them to this point. They're looking really good here over the last couple of weeks.
I was blown away, the 180 that I saw from watching them against Providence to seeing them in person last week in Las Vegas against Houston. And Johnny Davis was sensational. He was my player of the week, the way he played. I do want to share one quick story.
Please.
So I walk out of that gym. This is about an hour after the game when Wisconsin beat Houston. And the way it was in the Mandalay Bay, you go from the arena back to the rooms. That's what the teams did. So I'm just walking out of the arena because I was heading over to the Gonzaga-UCLA game, and I literally bump in to Brad Davison with a couple of Badgers, newcomers. And Brad stops me and says, you know what? Hey, this is Andy Katz from Big Ten Network. I want you guys to meet him. You need to meet him. He's going to talk about you. And it was just a little anecdote, a little just sort of thing, but it struck me the leadership that he has shown. And it's not about me, but it's just about that Brad wanted to make sure these Wisconsin players knew who covers the team for Big Ten Network, among many. And it just showed the maturity with Brad that, you know, he has sort of taken a little bit of a step back. You know, it's Johnny Davis's team, but also wants to make sure that everyone's on the same page. This is what we do here at Wisconsin. We talk to someone like this. You know, this is how you handle yourself. And I don't know, I was just impressed by his maturity.
This could be an interesting week for them. I think we'll learn a lot. We've learned a lot already in the past week, but they've got Marquette, Indiana, Ohio State. They got a lot of big games coming up here.
Well, this is winnable in Atlanta, and then they certainly can beat Marquette at home.
Maryland and Virginia Tech, the Terps, they lost to George Mason, lost to Louisville. They've had some narrow escapes as well. You mentioned the Louisville game already, and yet this is a team that I think has a lot of talent and is just kind of trying to piece it together. They haven't been shooting the ball great. Doesn't feel like they have a real knockdown three-point shooter. What do you make of Maryland at this point in the season?
So I think they will settle down with the relationship with Ayala and Fats on the perimeter. And obviously Dante Scott, Hakeem Hart, they've got all those pieces in the way. The key for me with this team is Kudus Wahab. If he plays up to his potential, then this Maryland team can be a top 4 or 5 Big Ten team. Maybe that's putting too much pressure on him. But they need him to be elite in this league, especially with what they've got coming up in the Big Ten. Virginia Tech, not as strong in the post. I mean, they're good on the wings and the perimeter. So this is an advantage here where Maryland can take advantage of it if Wahab plays up to his potential.
Really good story last year, Virginia Tech was under Mike Young. What about Nebraska going to NC State? Obviously, without Trey McGowan's here for the foreseeable future. What do you make of the Huskers at this point?
Well, once again, I mean, NC State is injury-riddled as well. This is a winnable game for the Huskers. You know, the Creighton game was a disappointment for them at home. They need something to give them some momentum going into the Big Ten. And this is an opportunity. You know, we don't now anticipate Nebraska is going to be an NCAA tournament team because of the injury to McGowan's. And they were struggling even before that, obviously, to begin the season against Western Illinois. But I'm intrigued to see how they play in a game that they can compete and win.
Yeah, and Bryce McGowan's has been as advertised, by the way. He's really good. So we'll see. Yeah, interesting game. And Andy will be back here tomorrow to help us review those as well as the Penn State game. Nebraska's Austin Allen, the first ever Husker to be named the Qualla Clark Tight End of the Year. Allen, whose 602 receiving yards this year were a record for Nebraska tight end and were the most for any Big Ten player at his position, has already announced that he is turning pro. So here are all of the award winners from yesterday and today in an easy-to-digest format. C.J. Stroud and Aiden Hutchinson, the two players who won multiple awards. Iowa with 3 different players bringing home individual awards. That is the most of any school. So Anthony Herron rejoining me. Let's go through a few of these. Mel Tucker was the coach of the year by both the media and the coaches. There have been some coaches that turned in really impressive performances. I think Jim Harbaugh was obviously in that discussion. Jeff Brom would probably be in it as well. But in your mind, Tucker clear cut?
I don't think there was really much margin there. I mean, I think overall, just hands down, Mel Tucker for what the expectations were for his program, going 2-5 last year, now turning that into a 10-win season this year. And the way that even the expectations coming into the year, like it's one thing to say for Michigan, we didn't expect them to meet Michigan expectations, but you still know going in that they're one of the most talented teams in the league. With Purdue, Jeff Brom has been there for a handful of years at this point. Mel Tucker, after his first legitimate offseason in coaching Michigan State, put this together. So, I mean, it's remarkable what he's been able to do in East Lansing, and I suppose it's part of why he got that bag.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, look, they were picked dead last in the league coming in.
It was going to be maybe 4 wins or something was the expectation.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable. And I thought the bounce back this past weekend was really impressive too, and it speaks volumes because there's obvious disappointment. When you don't just lose a game on a huge stage, you get blown out in a game on a huge stage, and to come back and play as well as they did and pull out a win, I thought was really something. A few more of these individual awards. Tyler Linderbaum, again, winning the Offensive Lineman of the Year. What stands out as you watch him as a guy who played in the trenches, albeit on the other side?
It's not easy to win an individual award as an offensive player when Iowa's offense has struggled as much as they have this year. But you just watch the guy play the position and the athleticism that's there, the way he can block people out in space, the way at the point of attack, like on critical downs and distances, you're wondering, will they run it behind their offensive tackle? Will they run it to the left or the right? They'll go QB sneak on 3rd and medium, like 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6. They're QB sneaking it for first downs and touchdowns. It's because of the excellence of Tyler Linderbaum on the interior of that offensive line when they've struggled, like we talked about earlier, struggled so much at other positions around him.
Charlie Jones, I think, is a great story. I mean, here's a kid very lightly recruited. He starts at Buffalo. He comes to Iowa as a walk-on. I love walk-on stories. I work with one of the great ones ever, I think, Howard Griffith, and have incredible respect for what that takes to go somewhere with nothing promised to you. It has been pretty cool to see him emerge as a weapon. And in both phases of the return game, the punt return and the kick return, he is electrifying. And then as a receiver, they found a way to work him into the offense more. But I think this, Jalen Reed, there's a comparable case that could have been made for what he's meant to Michigan State this season. But again, when you factor in Iowa's offense and what the return game has meant to the Hawkeyes being able to be a double-digit win team this season, Charlie Jones has become one of the surprising standout stars of the entire conference. I do want to ask you about Aiden Hutchinson as well. Starting to create some Heisman buzz. Right. How legitimate do you think that is, and what do you see when you watch him? I think it's legitimate because of the season that we're in the midst of right now. I mean, Bryce Young didn't do anything in the final game of the regular season that would separate him from the pack. C.J. Stroud's team lost, even though statistically he was excellent in the game. And Kenneth Walker III, we referenced what happened against Ohio State. So there are other players who seem to be, at the forefront of the Heisman discussion that haven't separated themselves from the pack. And it feels like the discussion is becoming more where folks are perhaps more willing to consider a defensive player. He's worthy of that consideration. Now, he is really something. I mean, a guy who can take over a game. There are a few guys with a lot riding on this weekend, above and beyond other teams playing. I mentioned Bryce Young, but Aiden Hutchinson is certainly one of them.